back to the last time through hard, interesting, well, not, I don't know, hard, heavy, fast, interesting things all happening at once here at the end, like a fireworks display. So first, I just want to review, because in office hours, I had the feeling that people weren't very clear yet about what's going on with Pip, and I can understand that. Particularly, we had a discussion about what it means for Pip to say that he's a bat. And I'm not going to give you any brilliant answer, but at least an answer that keeps you from having some unbrilliant answers, which I had to cope with. Okay, here we go. So what does Pip do when he's confronted with the doubloon? And remember, think of the doubloon as the rich reality, because the doubloon has so much stuff on it that you can see it from so many different perspectives. And that's just like the way the world is. And he sees that. So he has his view that all understanding is a kind of proliferating experience of perspectives, all of which are right, or many of which are right. There's also, I guess, in the rich reality, now that I think of it, I don't know why I ever thought of it before. And not all the perspectives are right. Some of them are illusions, and when you follow them out, they lead you astray. That famous example in the philosopher I read, Merleau-Ponty, that you see a rock on the path, you get ready to walk over the rock, and when your foot comes down, it turns out to be a spot of sunshine, and there isn't any rock. And the world has got stuff like that in it too. It's a very rich reality, and everybody picks out their perspective. And so Pip says, I look, you look, we look, they look. He does say I look, doesn't he, too? Because now I'm getting more and more puzzled, because he shouldn't be saying I look and putting himself down on the same level with the you look and the he look. Quick, let's find out. Somebody quickly find who's good at this thing. Turn to Pip and tell me whether he says I look. I may have... What? He does. Oh, that's disturbing. It could be that Melville is just confused, but I mean, that's a last desperate move. You see why I'm worried. I mean, the whole point is that from the crow's nest up from where he's looking at all the people who are looking at the doubloon and describing their perspective on the rich reality, Pip isn't doing that. He doesn't ever give an interpretation of the doubloon. Maybe the thing to say is, but he does look. I guess that's the thing to say. They look at the perspectives on rich reality, but he looks at all of them looking at various perspectives on reality, each of which takes them for reality. I didn't say that, but that's why they're bats. Each one of them takes this perspective on rich reality, thinks that's just all reality, and Pip doesn't do any of that. But he does something. He looks. And now one thing. I'm going to do the hard thing next. Then the next hard thing he says. Now I've gotten used to that. So after all, he's got a perspective too, namely a meta perspective, as Tyler says, in which he sees that everybody else has a perspective on the rich reality. And then he says they're all bats because they're batty to believe that their perspective on reality is that's how reality is. And then he says, they're bats. And then he says, and I'm bats, too. Now, what in the world does that mean? Well, that's really impossible. It certainly doesn't mean that he's blind as a bat, which is what they all are. What else could it mean? Well, people have been trying to tell me, but it took a long time to really convince me that he's not blind as a bat. He has the other feature of bats, that he can see in the dark. That there's, even though it's hard to make sense of how all these perspectives on rich reality, and in a certain sense it's kind of like the dark, and we see better in the dark, Melville says early on in the book. So I think that maybe that's the sense in which he's a bat. Now I see a hand up here. Did I say what you were going to say? Oh, that's terrific. I should have let you say it. You sure it's the same? Okay. I don't want to miss anything. So let's see. So he isn't saying about himself, he can't be saying about himself that he's crazy. He's got to be saying that he's a different kind of bat. Okay, everybody happy with that? I am. It took, but only barely. So, and then, yeah.
Something here that didn't say. So Nietzsche says everything's a perspective, and that too is a perspective.
Well, that's certainly not what this, everything is a perspective, and that's too is a perspective. I see. Pip could say that. I don't think he thinks that. Oh, but I see if he, that's interesting. I see your point now. Yeah, if that were the case, then what? Does he know? But he knows everything is a perspective. So we're still stuck with the question, why would he say he was blind as a bat? Well, that he was mad. Everybody else sees a perspective and doesn't know it's a perspective. Pip sees that they all see perspectives, don't know their perspectives, and what? Knows that he's got a perspective, but doesn't know that it's his perspective?
Knows that it's a perspective, and as such, it could be blind to reality. It could be just a perspective.
It should be just a perspective. I think that's interesting because nobody sees that's the way things really are, because there is no way things really are. And it's all, well, I don't want to try to compare Nietzsche and Melville. There's no one way things really are, is what Melville wants to say. There's no way at all. Wait, let me just say it for those who haven't. How many have read Nietzsche at all anywhere? Nietzsche talks about putting an interpretation on chaos. One thing is sure, I think, and only the first time, this is the first time I thought it. I mean, that's not, I've said this already, but I'll say it again. It's not putting a perspective on chaos. The doubloon is full of plenty of real unchaosy stuff. Twin peaks, the triple, 3 mountains, which are volcanoes, and the zodiac and all that. I want to say that whereas Nietzsche seems to think that you impose an interpretation on chaos, Melville thinks you pick a perspective, or perspective really picks you. You get drawn in by a perspective on rich reality. I think that's a very different position. I don't think there's a disagreement with Tyler. I'm not sure.
So one way of making sense of Kip's I see, or I'm blind too, is to say that he's had Nietzsche's insight, which is there are a bunch of perspectives, and that too must be a person blind.
Yeah.
The problem I think with your reading is if you don't make that move, you're suggesting Pip has an objective view of reality, not just the perspective.
Yes, I think Pip is has an objective view of reality. I think he really saw God's foot on the treadle, for instance. Otherwise, he would just have a little breakdown because his head was full of water. I mean, he saw something important.
But that puts us in this weird position of saying Melville thinks all there are perspectives on realities, except there's some character who has. He just thinks the proper thing to say there is no. Actually, everyone just has a perspective on reality. Melville.
Well, I like that. I can see that's a consistent thing to say. I don't know what to think. Because, I mean, whereas the rest of them just are picking out something from that coin which has such a rich reality, he's picking out some other something, which is that they're all picking out something on the coin. And I'm not sure we should treat the two as the same mistake, so to speak. They're picking out the interpretation of the coin and thinking it's the right answer. He's picking out an interpretation of the coin, and now you want to say knows that it's not the right answer because there's no right answer. I don't know what to say. Maybe Erica, say something.
It's just that I would have thought that Melville wasn't in this book making a sort of making a stand for an entirely global relativism about the nature of reality. For instance, he provides an objective description of the doubloon, which we, I think, can take at face value. That's really what's on the balloon.
I agree. I hope that's the right thing to say. And you agree too, no? Well, never mind. Go ahead.
So I would have thought that where this issue about perspective or interpretation comes in is in thinking about not, reality and all its physical objectivity, but simply in what it is about reality that provides value in people's lives. And so if if we are talking just about that, then I don't think we run into all of these sort of relativistic paradoxes that seem to be generated.
Maybe not. But nothing tells him what to do. That's important. That's the sense in which he's also bats, but in a different way. His perspective doesn't give you any guidelines for how to behave. It doesn't pick out a perspective. And that's important. And that, you say, is what it means to say that he's bats because he's lost his identity and can't understand anything. Okay, I like that. I think that's better than that. So the latest version is not that he can see in the dark, which I never did like, but I couldn't think of anything better. It's he's lost his identity. Remember, Pip doesn't exist anymore. His mind is completely blown. He doesn't know who he is, and he doesn't understand anything. So he's lost the possibility of any guidelines by seeing, maybe by seeing everybody mistaking their perspective for reality. That's the doubloon. Or maybe he will, which is before the doubloon or after, at the same time, he sees the coral insects, which is another reason he's lost his mind, because he sees that everything is totally accidental, and ultimately you can't ground anything. That's all finally just the activity of these random insects producing something, though, not chaos, but a beautiful rainbow of perspectives. That's what the insects seem to produce. Anyway, we didn't intend to start talking about this, but it's so much on my mind that I got to stop. So let's see. We just jumped to the last line of that section on 412. I get more and more sort of amused and convinced by this interpretation that when the Manxman says that's, how does it put it exactly? Because it seems so strange to dump it in like that, but it seems so accurate. So he says, here is the end of a rotten line. We better start earlier. So the one that is daft by strength is Ahab, trying to impose his perspective on everything and everybody and get the right one on 412, the end of chapter 125. And then there's the one who is daft by weakness, and that's what I was just talking about, namely so mind-blowing that he has no identity, and he has no guidelines, and he has no perspective on reality, at least none that could give you any sense of who you are and what you could do. That's your point. He has a perspective, that's your point, and it won't give him any, it leaves him with no understanding of who he is or what he can do. Okay, that sounds good. And now I just want to, and here's the end of the rotten line. The rotten line. Somehow there's been this whole tradition, this whole history of people positing various views of reality, and each one more, lacking of giving you a coherent life than the previous one. And now we've come to the end of them. The totally willful imposition of meaning, which is Ahab, and which is definitely monomaniac, and definitely very, very depressing and dangerous in this story. I mean, I looked at this time, how many times Ahab is referred to as monomaniac Ahab. That's like kind of his nickname, and he certainly is devastating. It's safe to say now, I said I would not say it until we reach the end of the book, and it's all his fault, Ahab's, and his monomania, which is seeking an answer to the meaning of the universe and of his life, that's finally brought down the Pequod and killed everybody in the book, except Ishmael, and that's pretty dangerous. Okay, so that's the end of the line, and now we better have a new line, and according to the way the book works, the new line is to return to the Mayday gods of old, which is his funny way of talking, or returning to the Homeric pantheon in some, of course, updated way, which is what this book that Sean Kelly and I written tries to tell you, a book totally based on Heidegger in the background, which someday you may want to take a course in if this kind of thing interests you. Anyway, so we have to have a whole new line, because the other one has come to this nihilistic end. Okay, so 2,000 years of deep, sensitive people who get more and more in need of some definite answer about reality and how to live their lives, and can't get along without it, and can't find it, because there isn't any final truth. And so Nietzsche says it more clearly, everybody gets to be more and more of a meaning addict in the history of the West. And more they're trying to believe there is a right answer, and sort of each one proposing a right answer. In this course, Dante obviously stands for that, what it would be like to be able to satisfy that desire. It would be to become one with the will that moves the sun and the other stars, and understand everything and fit into everything. But if you can't do that, you're in terrible trouble. Okay, so anybody want to say anything about that? I'm just getting us up to where we were. Oh yeah, go ahead. Melville predicted the what? Yes, definitely. That's what I'm saying. Yes, that Melville predicted that this tradition ends with us demanding a kind, and it's so amazing. Nietzsche's, only 50 years later, Nietzsche will say all these things, and it will seem not like somehow part of what everybody sees, but Melville sees it earlier. And yes, it's a kind of nihilism. There is some kind of demand for an absolute answer, and that you can't get along without it and run your life, and that you can't find it, and you can't have it. Various people have various views about what it is you can't find. I mean, for you all, it may be that you found it in Camus, where Camus' whole view is that we're seeking a kind of absolute in our lives, and there isn't any absolute in reality. I think that's already in The Stranger, but I'm having not had it on mind when I read The Stranger, I'm not sure. But anyway, that's a kind of nihilism, and Melville is predicting it. What more can I say? Well, read our book. That's what I could say. That's where we spell out the nihilism and what it was and how Homer is the answer to it. I can't resist saying that I'm sort of happily to announce that there's going to be a review of our book, All Things Shining, in the New York Times Book Review section. And that's really important if you write a book. And apparently also in the Wall Street Journal, those are the two important places for reviews to be. And of course, we don't get any guarantee there's going to be a good review, but at least we're going to find out what people think about it. Okay, now, so Ahab is trying to force the universe to give an answer, and he can't stand this proliferation of perspectives, and he wants to get rid of the kind of indeterminacy or non-representability which leads people to try to get these perspectives, and to get over having all these perspectives is to have some kind of monotheism, some version of an answer to what's the true perspective, and I think Sean just called me up this morning to ask me a question which is on my mind now, and I don't know the answer. I mean, it's more than monotheism that he would be against, because it doesn't really require a God, a single God. It doesn't have to be ontotheology, that is a theology based on a theo, which is this God figure. And you can have gods like Zeus and still not have the kind of ontotheology that has one answer to everything. And you can also have a kind of something that has an answer to everything, but doesn't have a God. That's an interesting one. That's Buddhism. The Buddhists don't have a God figure, but they certainly have a view about exactly how reality works and how you better get in sync with it and what to do to get in sync with it. I hear about it every day from my son, and that's another way to avoid nihilism. But Melville thinks if he thought about Buddhism, he'd have a view about why it doesn't work. He's thought about a lot of other views, all of whom think that there's some kind of answer, like pantheism. Pantheism's another one, which is a funny case, because it thinks that everything is God. Pantheism. Across everything gods. Or it isn't even gods. There's just one big God, this blue something or other that Melville thinks is a joke and writes about. I read it, and if you believe in that, you're going to fall over and fall out of the crow's nest and drown. That didn't last long. Okay, I've got to. Anybody want to say anything about this? You can stop me, because there are too many things on my mind and I'm going off in all directions. I got to stick to my notes here. Let's see. So all this monomania, I think we'll just say yes, but I want to show you where it on 154. It's just, but when you look, it's all over the place. That it's the mono of this monomaniac that's wrong with Ahab, and he thinks the white whale is a monomaniac incarnation of all malicious agencies on 154, and but it's just everywhere that he's described as a monomaniac, and that means obsessed with this one question: what is the universe really about? What's Ahab's role? What is he supposed to do? What's his calling? Is there any? He can't find out, and he can't even find out whether there is any calling to find out. This is just driving him crazy. And then he gets so crazy, in my picture how the book works, that when the whale finally, Moby bites off his leg, then that becomes the focus of this concern about what the universe is up to and what is his role in it. And it all gets focused on Moby Dick. But he'd had that problem already. He spit in the silver calabash, the prophet says about him at one point. And, see, that's like spitting in the holy water. That's asking for trouble. That's saying, if there's a God, you better do something about this. You're not going to let people get away with spitting in the holy water. And he gets attacked by somebody, but it doesn't answer his question. So now let me see. And Ahab can't stand the uncertainty. So somebody I was talking to, whose opinion I like a lot, seemed to me wrong in thinking that Ahab could somehow accept uncertainty. The crucial passage for that seems to be on 375, where he's talking to the carpenter about the vice that turns when clamps wood, and he says it does pinch, and the carpenter says, beware, it'll break bones. And then this important thing, it's funny how these little lines, like the rope, you have to throw away the rope and get a new one. There, Ahab says in a little line, I like a good grip. I like to feel something in this slippery world that can hold a man. That's again, he wants the one positive, certain, applicable to his life answer, or he can't stand it. And then he has, I'm just repeating what I just said, this encounter with Moby Dick on 154, in which Moby Dick seems to him, 154, what did I say? I say 154, but I didn't look at 154. On 154, yeah, again, it's the monomaniac thing of his relation to the whale after it bites off his leg, the middle of 154. Then, after that, he's got this bottom of 154, and it is not probable that his monomania, and is it not probable that this monomania in him took its instant rise at the precise time of his bodily dismemberment. That means that his sort of obsession with this question about his role in the universe, which he already had and was leading him to provoke God if he could, got focused all on Moby Dick. That's what that says. But then we get a whole bunch of perspectives on Moby Dick running through the book. I wanted to go quickly through them too. So there's Starbuck's view. I'm just going to list them. When the first time through, there's so many things happening that you can't keep track of all these things. Okay, Starbuck's view is that first encounter with Moby Dick. Now, where am I? 157. That's not the first encounter with Moby Dick. 177. Yes, that's what I had written here, and then I crossed it out. Why, I don't know. So Starbuck says that Moby Dick is a dumb brute, and you shouldn't have this thing. But that's on 177? I don't think so. That's why I crossed it out. But now I don't know where it is. That's all right. Well, if we don't come across it, 178, 138.
It's vengeance.
Yeah, good. Bottom of 138. Okay. Vengeance on a dumb brute, cried Starbuck, that simply smote thee from blindest instinct, madness. To be enraged with a dumb thing, Captain Ahab, seems blasphemous. And that's one view, dumb brute. And Ahab doesn't believe this. He thinks that there's, sometimes he says at the bottom, I think there's naught beyond, but that's enough. If the inscrutable thing is chiefly what I hate. He wants an answer, and it's just that Moby Dick isn't giving him an answer. Now that he's focused all the question on Moby Dick, it should turn out that if he got an eyeball-to-eyeball confrontation with Moby Dick, he could find out whether the universe, which is now focused in Moby Dick for him, is malevolent, is moral, is evil, is good. And you get all those in a hurry, and I'm going to tell them in a hurry anyway. So now I think something is crucial on 157. Let's try the top of 157. I want you to see, because I say it every once in a while, Starbuck is the only sort of believing Christian in the book. The Peleg and Bildad, the people who sign up people for this boat trip, are really sort of hypocrites. But Starbuck's a believer, and that makes him unable to cope with Ahab. Because Ahab's so much sort of more passionately upset. So we hear about at the top, the boat was morally enfeebled by the incompetence of mere unaided virtue, of right-mindedness in Starbuck. And so Starbuck's view is simple-minded, that Moby Dick is just a dumb brute. And we don't know what else to say about it yet. And it's important that Ahab demands an answer. He wants to find out things as they really are. And you can't find that out by just passively, objectively observing, he thinks. And Melville agrees about that. But you can't find it out. Science isn't going to find out by objective observing the meaning of the universe and my place in it. You've got to be passionately involved. And then Ahab says you could force an answer. And Melville thinks even then you can't, because there isn't any. But we haven't got to that yet. So Ahab's demanding an answer. There must be some mono meaning. Otherwise he can't live. I just want to repeat, that's 2,000 years of tradition that are culminating in Ahab and in his Pequod search, and that there must be an answer to the meaning of it all. And otherwise, you can't go on. And you have to face up to meaninglessness, but meaninglessness leads you nowhere, and you fall off the boat like Balkington. Yes, go ahead.
If Ahab's monomania is the result of this big civilization, why is it it's Starbuck?
Yes, wait, Starbuck is the one who doesn't want to go after Moby Dick. Yeah, but what else did you just say? I couldn't hear it. Say it again.
is it that it is the result like this long history of civilization that Starbuck has a belief in history?
I can't hear enough. Yeah, let me say something and then I'll see if this is an answer. You can't explain how it happened, but it's a fascinating fact that not the Homeric Greeks, those were polytheists, but Plato and the Athenian Greeks, the Greeks at the time, starting to put their act together at the time of Aeschylus, believed that there was one right answer, namely what Plato called the good. And then Aristotle, the next generation after Plato, said the good was that perfect something that everybody was attracted to, and there you are in Dante. While on another angle, the Hebrews also had their one creator, God. So we're over determined. And it's an amazing coincidence, the Hebrews didn't know anything about Plato's thing, and Plato didn't know anything about the Hebrew thing, and yet they fit together enough to make it look like it must be so. And who do you get then? You get St. Thomas, and you get something called the Supreme Being. You need a weasel word like the Supreme Being because you want to cover both Aristotle's prime mover, which isn't a person and you can't pray to it and so forth, and the Hebrew God, which is a person and you can pray for him, but you lump them together, if you're St. Thomas, as the Supreme Being, and our cultures develop that. But I think your question is how come our culture developed that? Is that what you're asking? And if you are, I'm afraid the answer is I don't think anybody can answer that.
It's a necessary result of history and civilization. Why is it that Starbuck feels more history doesn't feel the same?
Now I understand you and hear you. Isn't that interesting? Ooh, the world is coming together too much in my head. That question is answered in the New York Times. I doubt if many of you read the New York Times and read something called The Stone, which is philosophers writing editorial, such as a novel thing. In The Stone, there's just been a discussion of that very question, put differently, but still that very question. Are we really in nihilism? Is it really so that how can you get together the idea that there are these believing Christians like Starbuck and at the same time claim that we're in a state of nihilism where the why question doesn't receive an answer? That's a phrase from Nietzsche. And it's a good question. And guess who writes the latest article in The Stone? Sean Kelly, who's trying to explain, because it's the issue that the book is worrying about, is that the same thing you're worrying about. What do you do with these Christians who think that they've got an answer to this question? Not only do they feel that you've got to have an answer, but they feel, yeah, good, we've got it. And so Sean is arguing that given our understanding now, they either have to be fanatics or they have to be fooling themselves. Then this causes a whole lot, 200 replies already to this thing, this editorial in the New York Times. It's a tough one. In our book, Sean is going to make the case that if you believe that that our current way of doing philosophy, including the Hebrew, Christian, Plato, everything, gets you out of nihilism, you're wrong. You're deluded. You aren't really out of nihilism. You're just fooling yourself. That's his answer. I don't say that that's the right answer, but you might want to look at you can just get The Stone if you just get the New York Times on Google or wherever you get the New York Times. And it's about 3 or 4 days ago now. Do you know when this thing came out? What?
I think so.
Yeah, 3 or 4 days ago, your question got asked to millions of people, and Sean gave what he thought was an answer, and and other hundreds of people got upset. And that's not only, and I don't know, I certainly don't claim to have an answer. The way it gets posed there is, are the sort of happy, perhaps Christians, Jews, Muslims, whatever, living in the suburbs with their families and so forth, are they really searching for this sort of meaning? And is there really no such meaning? It's not obvious, period. So I tend to want to play down the nihilism issue in Moby Dick, but it's hard to play it down because looking for an answer is, or else having to destroy everything in yourself, looks like the way Melville thinks is that it's going to happen to our culture. And Nietzsche thinks it's happened already. God is dead, but nobody has noticed it yet. But it's going to take hundreds of years before they do notice it. It's a Nietzsche issue. If you want to pursue it further, you got to take Philosophy 7, or maybe some other, or Nietzsche course anyway. Okay, now, how all these things are coming together in the real, I was going to say in the real world, but the world of the New York Times editorial is probably not the real world, but in some world. Let's see where we are. So Ahab's the opposite of Starbuck, the kind of believing Christian. No, Ahab's not the opposite. Well, see, this is, Ahab is the opposite, not of Starbuck, the believing Christian, but of Balkington. That is the opposite of somebody who sees the meaninglessness and accepts it, which is what Balkington does. It lives in it, won't, on the land and not on the sea and not on the land. But now I have to say something else. There's so many things I want to sort of say in this kind of review. And how does Ishmael take all this? How does Ishmael take Ahab? Which first, that's what his question amounts to. Well, because Moby Dick, what does Melville and Ishmael think about Ahab's passionate quest to find the answer? Well, somewhere Ishmael speaks of Ahab's tragic greatness. Ishmael is so open to getting in touch with other people's moods that he can even get in touch with that mood. He comes to share the quest of Ahab. At the bottom of 149, you hear it with respect to Moby Dick. Ishmael says, a wild, mystical, sympathetical feeling was in me. Ahab's quenchless feud seemed mine. That's just one of the places that he says, I'll give you one more that I know of, that, well, that's not so good, just a second. No, I don't know where I don't want to go on searching right now. But it's true that Ishmael, who can share all moods, shares Ahab's mood. Several times he gets fully into the Ahab mood. By the way, footnote here, one of the things that struck me this time reading through the book again is how important moods are. I just want to put it on the record that just as the gods are attunements to moods, way back in Homer, Aphrodite's erotic mood, Ares, aggressive war mood, then that moods are the most meaningful and important things in people's lives in Homer, the way I'm trying to read him anyway. But what I didn't realize how utterly devoted to moods Moby Dick is. I mean, you notice it every once in a while. You notice that it was in a rainy, melancholy mood that got him to go on board the boat ships anyway. But pretty soon you hear about the moody Pequod, which is a phrase I'd never noticed before. And then you hear about moody Ahab. And of course, Ishmael is telling you all the time about his moods, that he's got a Catskill eagle kind of moods that go up high and go down low, that he's capable of ecstatic moods, like when he's squeezing the sperm, and he's capable of getting into despairing, rainy November moods that's why he has to leave on a boat. And keep your eyes open. I think there's probably more moods in here yet than I have realized. And of course that's important, because I would like to think that Melville senses that he's the heir to Homer. Remember the passage I keep wanting to quote, that if a poetical nation succeeds in luring back the Mayday gods of old and installing them on the now unhaunted hill beneath the now egotistical sky. See, the unhaunted hill is what science has done to nature, turned it all into boring stuff. I mean, Have you ever tried? I tried looking at the moon and trying to think what it must have been to people when you see a full moon when they didn't know that it was a rock and that there were probably old Coke bottles strewn around up there. So the hills have become unhaunted. The sky is egotistical because everybody's projecting or at least cutting, being having their perspective. So that having a perspective is the crucial thing to do. That's already the beginning of the egotistical, but the really final one is the Nietzsche one, and you're imposing your perspective, and then it becomes your interpretation is the source of all meaning. You, and then if there is this change in which we get back to the moody world of Homer, then Moby Dick will. Then the great God, Jupiter, he says, but he means Zeus, will be the leader. What I think that means is, no, never mind, that's for next time. If I can make sense of that, I don't want to go off in that's a complicated direction. So 149, 156, 157, that's what I just read. Okay, so now I'm going to go over quickly the various perspectives on Moby Dick, because that's how to understand the end of the book. The end of the book is, you see that in the fight with Moby Dick, all the various perspectives on Moby Dick show up. And so that the question, well, what's Moby Dick really? And is the right question to ask, but don't expect to get a normal sort of answer. Again, you're going to get a Melville answer. Maybe see if you can, in your head, think, what? I'll wait till we get there. Well, you should be bearing in mind as you go through the chase, well, what's it going to turn out? Is Moby Dick a dumb creature, a dumb brute, like Starbuck says? Or is he intelligent and malicious, which is, I don't know who says that. Maybe we better look on 213. I'd say that's what we're going to find out. Well, I can find out. That's too bad. 213, 214. No, there's lots going on there, but it's not intelligent and malicious. We need it. If anybody finds that one, send me an email. And if you find Ahab's tragic greatness, send me an email.
175 has some malice. The whale.
Oh, really? 175. Let's look at 175. There are too many pages. That's the problem. Oh, 170. Where? I don't see it.
The paragraph that begins, I might proceed with several more examples of the great power and malice.
Okay, good. Somebody says, I probably Ahab. I can only see it as malice with some inscrutable force sinewy in it or something like that. And
in that same paragraph, it says, he acts not so often with blind rage as with willful, deliberate designs of destruction.
Wow, that's pretty good. I never noticed those passages. Where is that? I don't see it yet. He launches himself. I don't see. He does what? He
says, again, it is very often observed that if the sperm whale, once struck, is allowed time to rally, he then acts not so often with blind rage as with willful, deliberate designs of destruction.
I see it now when you read it. I'm going to mark it in my next time I give the course. I don't know what I want to say there if I mark it there. What? 70. Okay.
The footnotes on 173. It's about the same topic.
Goodness. Okay. So anyway, we put that on the list. He is malicious, or a dumb brute, which is very different than malicious, or a moral avenger. That's the town hall stories. These perspectives on Moby Dick show up in these various inserted stories that Melville tells. The town hall story is this bad guy Radney is provoked Steele kills into killing him. He was so upset, and with arrogant insults. And then just as he was about to kill him, Moby Dick shows up and kills him instead, which is good because Steelkill is a nice guy, and it would be too bad if he had got in trouble for killing Randy. This is like what is the play or the other short story of Melville's, where there's Captain Vere and where there's Billy Budd is another independent version of the same story, where some good person is led to do some bad thing, and then all kinds of trouble comes. Okay, let's see. So Radney then is trying to get the whale, and he gets rowed up right up against the whale, and then he gets knocked down and drowns, disappears, hooked onto Moby Dick. And then there's the Jeroboam story. A mad sailor prophet Gabriel predicts the death of the chief mate Macy if he pursues Moby Dick, the way Moses predicts plagues in Egypt if the Pharaoh doesn't shape up. And then Macy disregards the prophet and pursues the whale. And then, according to me, it's on 258 that we hear about what happens to him. He gets in a boat and he goes after him on page 258, that long paragraph. And then the whale just comes up and knocks him out of the boat, and drags him down, and that's the end of him. So there he's fulfiller. So we got him as dumb brute, as malicious intelligence, as moral avenger. That's the town hall story. And now Gabriel, the prophet, fulfiller of prophecies. And what about all these? Can you say that these are all perspectives on something, and that you could just, if you get more and more perspectives, understand it better? I want you to see that that's, of course, no. That they contradict each other, these perspectives. He's malicious intelligent and dumb brute and moral avenger and so forth. This is typical Moby Dick book. I mean, it's like the rainbow. The rainbow, if you try to add these add up the colors, turns into this frightening whiteness, which is the dumb blankness full of meaning. And here, if you try to add up the various properties of Moby Dick, the various perspectives on him, they cancel out. They don't add up. You can't add up the way Moby Dick behaves and get a coherent, clear view of what Moby Dick is up to. In that way, Moby Dick is like the universe. And in that way is what drives Ahab crazy. He wants to get it settled what Moby Dick is up to. And yet turns out Moby Dick is indeterminate, indefinite, and so forth, as God. Only not even, because there finally isn't any indeterminate, indefinite God. There's just this rich reality, I think, that I keep talking about. So, and so when Ahab talks about Moby Dick, he says that he calls his way of being demonic indifference. That's a very funny phrase. That's as if Moby Dick not paying any attention to Ahab or the universe. Let's switch it to the universe. What would be demonic indifference to the universe? It would be something else, so sort of completely weird, that the universe would have no answer to what it was, and that would be the most infuriating, nasty thing it could do. It's a crazy combination that only Ahab could have, that the world shows this motivated, awful indifference to what human beings need, namely some definite understanding of how things are. I can't do any better than that. That's the thing that's driving Ahab crazy, the demonic indifference. And he's going to finally get to the chase of Moby Dick, and he's going to make him reveal which of all these possible characteristics is the real one. Or, I suppose, add them up. But it's clear that you can't add them up. You wouldn't get any sense at all. So there must be among them the right perspective. And that's what we're going to finally find out in the chase. So we're going to get to that in a second. And so we're going to ask, well, which perspective is right? And if you've been following Melville this far, you don't expect a simple answer as to which perspective is right. And does that mean then that all the perspectives are wrong? I don't think so. I think, and you have to now watch and see what happens, but it's been happening all along, and what I've been talking is, no, the amazing and peculiar way Melville sets it up is that all the perspectives are right. And that's the answer to which perspective is right. The answer is none of them is the right perspective, because all of them pick out different perspectives. And these perspectives aren't normal perspectives like perspectives on a house, which add up to one coherent reality. There isn't anything more than all of these different colors or different voices to talk like the place where the whale skeleton is, and they don't add up, and there isn't any right answer. But then comes this important thing, that they all pick out some perspective which is a true perspective of the world, or the doubloon, or Moby Dick, or whatever. But now the question is, that's very important. If anybody wants to object or say they haven't understood me, or I haven't understood Melville, don't let me stop you. Tyler will have a problem. Yeah. Well, that's a puzzle, isn't it? But that's the way the rich reality is. It means that it's true that Moby Dick is a dumb brute, and it's true that it's a malicious intelligent, and it's true that it's an avenger of moral standards and stuff. Why not? It can't be all of them all of the time, I think. That would be incomprehensible. But that it picks out some aspect of Moby Dick or the universe to describe it in some situation as X. Maybe that makes it too sensible, but that's how I think about it. One after another, right? That's what I think.
But then we're not saying they pick out aspects of a reality independent of the.
Why not? I mean, it seems to me, think about it, that there's some situations in which they do something which they really do it, but they just don't do it all the time. I mean, I don't know what to do with this. I know it's hard, but that's what you've got to try to figure out. Or do you think it's not right to say that all the perspectives are right?
The first step is to say they can't all be right at the same time because they contradict each other. Then the question is, what would it mean to say that they're still all right?
Yes.
At the time.
Yes.
But then we're not saying there's something independent which they're all right of, which they're all aspects of at the same time, right?
Right.
The other option, I think, is Nietzsche, which is to say they're all right in the sense that they're just perspectives. There's no independence. So I think you want the temporal one, which is to say they're all right at one time and another time. The temporal one makes sense, but I keep hearing you say something more, which is that
that's right. And why? And now let me just say why I want it, because this is important for you all to understand exactly where we are. The chase proves it. I mean, proves that that's how Melville thinks about it. On the first day, I forget which goes which, but I have it written down. I mean, on one day he's a moral adventure. On another day he behaves exactly like a malicious monster. On another day he's like a brute. His tail is just flapping around and smashing every ship in sight, but he doesn't seem to know that they're in sight. And it looks like the chase reveals that Moby Dick has all these aspects. Yeah, Jeremy.
But it seems like the temporal dimension doesn't make sense of the doubloon. So it's not as if the doubloon changes each time people look at it. There's just one doubloon, but somehow everything they see is always there.
That's good. That's a problem. Let's see what I can say about that. Yeah.
if that were the case, if this temporal dimension were to solve this difficulty, then there would be no reason why you couldn't add up those perspectives like you add up.
I see. Aha. Yes, it could be that they would all fit together. And you've got to say that they don't. So what does that mean? They don't, they cancel each other out. So, but if you don't say temporally, then they don't cancel each other out. I mean, unless you say temporal.
Stick in the temporal
Yeah.
dimension.
I see. Okay. That's right. But if they only cancel each other out for anybody who's looking for an answer. And then
Thinks that any particular time represents all.
has to do, that's right. Or that lots of things are going on at any particular time, but there's something going on which is the way things really are at all times. That's the same thing. And yeah.
But I think you have to, if you want to say though that each perspective is taking out an aspect of the same static reality, you either have to give up the claim that they're contradictory perspectives, or you have to say reality is contradictory.
Somehow, I think that all sounds right, but I sort of think that somehow Melville has got a version in which he wants to, with his story about the chase, give you a third thing. I mean, it looks like, I see that it looks like on day X, he's malicious, and then on day Y, he's benign, and on another day, he's something else. And now, either you think that that's okay because they're all different days, why not? And then you don't know anything about, then Moby Dick is like a house, and you've just seen the serial aspects of him or something like that. Or what? Or that all these various aspects that are true in some situation don't give you a truth about what Moby Dick is. And then my mistake is to say because they're all right. But we don't want to say either because they're all wrong. But we want to say that what? I mean, well, I don't know. Let's go look at the chase, is what I think. And maybe that's where it's supposed to become, there are two places where this complicated thing we're talking about, which is a great paper topic if you don't lose your mind writing on it. And the doubloon is one of them, and the chase is the other one, where something turns out to have a bunch of characteristics which cancel each other out somehow, and yet are characteristics of what that thing really is. I don't even know how to say it. Maybe that's a sign that there's something wrong with it, trying to say it. But let's look at the chase, because this is our last chance to talk about it. So first you get malicious intelligence, and then that's on 432. Is it? Earlier I didn't know what it was. Did I still not know, or do I now know? How exciting. He does things in a devilish way. Malicious intelligence at the top of 432. So Moby Dick, with malicious intelligence ascribed to him, excitingly transplants itself and gets beneath the boat, and then does this devilish thing. He shakes the boat, and monomaniac Ahab is getting two-thirds of the way down, furious with this vicinity of his foe, and he gets caught in the mouth of Moby Dick, and he has to pull the jaw apart to get out again, and so forth. It's all pretty amazing, and that's one of the things that happens. And he takes the whaleboat in his jaws and plays with it as if in a devilish way, and that's all on 432. At the bottom of 432, the Pequod, and then he gets Ahab surrounded by what happens? There was a dire zone. Oh yeah, the whale gets circling around the old man's head, and then he swims off, and they run to the rescue. So that's when, and he does that. He snaps two boats in two, and then so forth. That's another view of him. And then when the Pequod intervenes, Moby Dick swims off as if his malicious intentions had been frustrated. That's the last thing you get on 433. He sullenly swam off. The boats flew to the rescue. So he's unhappy about the fact that he couldn't get Ahab, but he could only swim around him for some reason or other. Okay, then the second day is awkward intelligence. The Moby Dick destroys all of the boats, flapping around his big tail, and he destroys Ahab's lass, and that's awkward intelligence. At the middle of 140, there's a whole area of destruction. He swims with his flukes flashing around, and as soon as if satisfied with his work for the time being, he pushed his head forward and he left. Okay, now let's see what else. The third day, that was the second day. See, all these are a series of views about Moby Dick, and it looks like, well, he just behaves those different ways on different days. That's the simple solution over there. I don't think that's the right solution, but you're going to have to help me figure out why. So next, the third day, he behaves like an indifferent animal, and finally he gets eyeball to eyeball Ahab with Moby Dick, and Ahab gets a chance to throw his harpoon into him at the bottom of 448. He darted his fierce iron and his fiercer curse into the hated whale, and he says, later he'll give his curse. Meanwhile, 448. So because of that, Moby Dick turns on the Pequod and destroys it. That happens on smiting at the middle of 449. He smites it with his jaws in fiery showers of foam, and it goes down. So that's Moby Dick not even knowing what he's doing, or at least not knowing what he's doing to Ahab, because that's the next important thing. So where are we here? Ahab has his soliloquy on 151 at the top of it, 5 lines down. Towards thee I roll, thou all-devouring and unconquering whale. To the last I grapple with thee. From hell's heart I stab at thee. For hate's sake I spit my last breath at thee. It's an amazing, wonderful curse. And then he says, thus I give up the spear. So now it looks like finally Ahab's going to get to strike through the mask, as he says, get Moby Dick to reveal what, whether he's benign, whether he hates Ahab, whether he doesn't care about Ahab, and so forth. And then both of them will know finally where things stand. And then what happens? The big surprise, the first paragraph on 451, the harpoon was darted, the stricken whale flew forward with igniting velocity, the line ran through the groove, ran afoul, Ahab stopped to clear it, he did clear it, but the flying turn caught him around the neck, and voicelessly as Turkish moose bowstring their victim, he was shot out of the boat ere the crew knew he was gone. So Ahab in the end never knows what hit him. He doesn't get a chance, even though he's as eyeball to eyeball as you're ever going to get. But in the end, he doesn't know what hit him. He just was choked all of a sudden. And Moby Dick doesn't know what he's doing. He's killing Ahab, dragging him along in the rope that goes with the harpoon. Well, what do you make of that? I don't know. It's got something like a series of ways that Moby Dick reveals himself, and they do seem to be contradictory, but they're only contradictory because there's a series, but they aren't contradictory if you look at them as a series, but if you look at them as revealing his character, they're contradictory. But you better not then, I guess, look at them as revealing what kind of creature Moby Dick is. That is he malevolent? Is he a dumb brute? Though that kind of question, you're not going to get an answer to, because the answers are going to cancel out unless you say, well, he was intelligent on this day and a dumb brute on that day. That doesn't feel right. But what exactly Melville is up to, if anybody knows, they got to tell me. But at least I've got where I can almost pose the question. Good, a hand up, yeah.
It's not one character who has all these views, like at the end, it's not like Ishmael who's saying all this thing about the whale, like objectively. It's like all the same characters. For instance, Starbuck is the one who says, in like the second day that the whale seems, or the third day that he seems in dumb through, it's not like some other character who has espoused a different view throughout the book thinks that now. So it seems like it's just the characters who have these perspectives all along continue.
I think that's interesting. I think that may be a paper topic in there. I think you're right that it's like the doubloon even more than I thought. Whereas in the doubloon, each of the people is drawn into one interpretation of the doubloon, one perspective out of the rich reality. Here, out of the rich reality, each character again takes out their sees it from their perspective. But it doesn't mean, in the case of the doubloon, all those different squiggles that perspectives are really on the doubloon. And now you see, well, Moby Dick is really doing a lot of frantic splashing and swimming and bumping into things and breaking things and so forth. And that's like the doubloon. And then each of them picks out, because they already have a preconception, which of all that splashing around is characteristic defining of Moby Dick. I think that's probably right. And then, of course, Pip will come along and say, well, that's just a mistake. There is no one of them that's defining of Moby Dick. If you look at it that way, you're going to get contradictions. You've got to understand that these are all just possible perspectives on a very rich reality and not take them to be defining what kind of creature Moby Dick really is. There's something important about what you're doing. Follow up, yeah.
During this whole thing.
Oh, really? I didn't even know that. Okay.
Doesn't it's like no perspective throughout the whole book. He kind of like latches on to Ahab again because he's not strong enough. It's like Melville saying that no one is strong enough to have this kind of perspective. And at the end, he's locked into Ahab's cabin as he goes down with the ship.
They all go down with the ship. That's interesting. I didn't realize he was locked in Ahab's cabin. But of course, he's not strong enough to have even one perspective, let alone some way of dealing with all the perspectives. That's right. Let me go, because I've only got 8 more minutes, and we're so near the end. I want to just do the end. So there's this soliloquy, and they go down without knowing what hit him, and so forth. And then the Pequod goes down. And now comes, I want to comment on this for the next 10 minutes. So what happens next? Well, the Pequod goes down, and it goes down with a fancy, complicated description on 451. Okay, toward the bottom, about 10 lines from the bottom. As if we didn't have enough going on, Melville throws in this weird stuff. A skyhawk that had followed the main truck downwards from its natural home among the stars, pecking at the flag. Tashigo is pounding the flag, nailing the flag to the mast, even though he's already underwater as the boat sinks. It's a crazy scene. And then he hammers it. He feels that the Seahawk is getting wrapped up in the flag, and he hammers it even more. So the ship goes down with the Seahawk. Where are we now? And he kept his hammer frozen there at the bottom of 451. And so the bird of heaven, now got to read this very carefully. So the bird of heaven, with archangelic shrieks, and his imperial beak thrust upwards, and his whole captive form folded into the flag of Ahab, went down with his ship, which, like Satan, would not sink to hell till she had dragged the living part of heaven along with her, and helmeted herself with it. Well, I had for years no idea what that meant. But I think if you look at it carefully, it's a funny way of saying that a different version of the rotten row. It's saying that everything that was significant about the West goes down with the boat. If you look at it, you see that it's the archangelical, that's the Christian and the Hebrew side. The imperial beak, that's the Roman side. Folded into the flag of Ahab, I guess that's the nihilistic side, or whatever Ahab is, the destruction of that tradition. All of them go down. And why this thing about Satan wouldn't sink to hell without dragging heaven along with her. I don't know how to put that, except to say that it tells you that whatever it is that's going on through the whole history of the West, summed up in the Pequod, is going down. Let's see now. The disasters, the result of his monomania, he demanded that the whole universe have meaning and so forth. He wanted something like Dante's world, but you can't have that anymore. And what happens instead, because he insists on having something like Dante's world, and you can't have it anymore, everything collapses. And that's what the bird is stuck in here for, as far as I can see. Everything is summed up in the bird, and it sinks. So the harpooners go down, the view of nature goes down. We'll come back to that. Let me think a minute. So now let me just sum up. And the important final thing, the amazing final thing, he gets saved by Queequeg's coffin. But that's significant too. It's not just any old coffin, it's Queequeg's coffin. I have such a minimal grip on this that I have to read it. So let's read that. The moral seems to be that monotheism finally got so central to our culture, and from there spread to all other cultures, because you ask yourself, well, why did Queequeg go down? Well, he was a little bit corrupted by Christianity, he said. And so it must be with Tashigo too. That is, this Judeo-Christian Roman Catholic thing that we are part of took over all the other cultures, which is true. It's happening. Melville says there's not going to be any isolated cultures anymore. They're all going to be watching television and so forth. And so let's see. It spread to all other cultures and corrupted them, and everything got absorbed into it. And whether it be the monotheism of Dante, where everybody has a place in creation, or this last stage where nobody has a place in creation, but they can't stand it, or even a further stage like Balkington, where he doesn't have any place in the universe, but he's bravely, heroically standing there anyway. All of it goes down, wrapped up in the monomania flag of Ahab. So when monotheism becomes unbelievable, and which certainly Melville thinks, then the two are somehow out of control. The way I don't know what I mean here. Two monomaniacs break down. They take everything down with them. What are the two monomaniacs, I wonder? Ahab and what? All practices bound up with either of these ways. Oh yeah, I see. Nihilism, brave, heroic nihilism goes down. That's Balkington. He's gone down already. Or the sort of fanatical search for meaning, and now that's going down too. So, and because everything has become totalized in this tradition, everything goes down. I wanted to read from Nietzsche, because Nietzsche is so much on the same wavelength. So if you want to hear what it sounds like in another language, which is less weird and maybe more convincing, in The Gay Science, in page 279, here he says about what's going to happen. People don't know yet what's going to happen. And then I'm quoting, how much must collapse now that this faith has been undermined, because it was built upon this faith, that is the Christian faith, propped up by it, growing into it. For example, the whole of European morality. And now it's gone, and yet the section which sounds like disaster, he says, what is it now? It's amazing. He talks about this plenitude and sequence of breakdown, destruction, ruin, and cataclysm that is now impending. Who could guess, and so forth, that it's going to happen? It'll be an eclipse of the sun, and so forth and so forth. And that section of the book is called, this is just in time, the punchline, in Nietzsche, the meaning of our cheerfulness. And that is, it sounds like something that maybe Melville could endorse too, I'm not sure. But he talks about how wonderful, he says now, we philosophers, when we hear the news that God is dead, hear this with gratitude, amazement, premonitions, and expectations. I mean, Ishmael has some kind of gratitude at the end, although it isn't because God is dead. It's because of something about the coffin, which I'll get to in a second. And he says, Nietzsche says, all daring of the lover's knowledge is permitted again. The sea, our sea, lies open again. Perhaps there has never been such an open sea. So it's the sea instead of the land, which we started this part of the course with, remember? The sea, Nietzsche has the same view of the sea as Melville, interestingly enough. And it's the sort of utterly ungrounded, open, with no fixed meaning, indefinite, and so forth. And you can get happy about that. Let's see now. So the whale is the paradigm of the sea, and that's all got to do with how the practices of the people can have meaning without there being some whole right answer. And for Melville too, that's good news, that the sea has triumphed over the land. And now, final thing. Then comes the question of the coffin. Now I'm going to talk about that for a second. He's picked up by chance, not because he's saved. Everything is by chance, like those insects that are making the world by chance. And he's escaped monotheism. And he's healed, presumably by being sensitive to the holy or healing background practices, which are sacred. And what does that mean? Well, I can only give you a hint, but he's only giving us a hint. What Queequeg is carving on his coffin. Remember, Queequeg has carved, tattooed on his body, an understanding of reality which he is, but it's so close to him that it is him, and he can't read it at all, but it makes him able to act with a meaning in a meaningful, I guess, more or less meaningful world. It's complicated because you might think that he wouldn't go down, but I guess it's because he's corrupted that he does. Anyway, so there are these meanings, these hieroglyphics on Queequeg, and remember when he's dying, Queequeg copies the hieroglyphics onto the coffin. And it's this coffin with its written into it account of the sacred meaning of some culture that nobody can read, but that you can live in a way. Now you have to say in a way that is healing, because that coffin with those carvings is what Queequeg was making when he thought he was dying, but didn't die. And when he looked like he was dying, you could see some kind of eternal happiness in his eyes. And this Queequeg, who's got these markings that he's healed. Remember, everybody else is sick about the head. Queequeg is a little sick about the head. That's why he goes down too, presumably. That those markings on the coffin are the sort of sacred symbols of how to lead a meaningful life, and that's what's saving Ishmael. What, last comment? No, I think he copies them before he gets sick, doesn't he? We'll have to talk about that later, but let me get my last word in here. So the coffin is an example. I'll just give you this mouthful. So the fact that a culture has in it a bunch of practices that are embodied in the bodies of the people who share that culture, practices which can't be controlled or made explicit or objectified, is the saving power somehow. The coffin's an example of the unrepresentable, and that's got to do with the sperm whale, but it's an unrepresentable because it's in each person, and it's what will save us after the collapse of Christian or of ontotheology, all those religions which took over the world, led to nihilism and collapsed. The pagan tradition carved on the coffin is almost free of ontotheology. Maybe it's completely free, I'm not sure. But it makes possible the holy healing, which was Queequeg's, quote, eternal health, and it's passed on to Ishmael, and it's saved. It isn't said, he's sort of complicated here. Melville's trying to do too many things at once, probably. It isn't as if Ishmael is saved by the practices of Queequeg's culture. It's something more abstract. He's saved by what it is that's sort of tattooed on him, and is the sacred practices of his culture, which, because he's totally outside the monomania business, is able to give him the chance to start a new lineage, start a new line, which we don't know anything about, except that, guess what?